again to another episode of our podcast or a show, whatever you want to call it. If you're viewing it on YouTube, obviously you're seeing us through Anchor podcast. You will hear what we have to say. And through Facebook or LinkedIn or Instagram, then you are seeing us. So welcome anywhere you are in the world. And today it will be, like I say all the time, we're trying to make it fun, laid back, having a good time with our guests. We don't really prepare. We're just throw a topic and say, hey, let's discuss it. Hopefully we can bring in something that you'll benefit from and that you can use in your personal and professional life. Now with me and my co-host, Dave Penrose. He specializes in cultural psychology. And our guest, all the way from California, I am going to let her introduce herself and tell us a little bit about you, Wendy.
Excellent. Hi. Thank you so much for having me here. My name is Wendy Brawer. I am Taiwanese American, Taiwan born, entrepreneur and founder of Intune Collective. We are a human transformation and business strategy consulting company. We also coach leaders and provide learning and development and trainings to really help people do the work that they're meant to do. And I also am trained as a somatic coach and an educator as well. So my background is also in education.
Very good. Impressive. Now, how is it so far with you with the transformation that you're doing with these leaders and these companies?
It's really fun. I love that aha moment when someone kind of gets something, or I love slowing things down so people can feel themselves and have a reflective practice to understand what they're really feeling or what they intend to say, to train people to check for eye contact with each other to like foster better connections on teams. And it's fun to play around and design as the educator, like design the learning experience that allows like transformation to happen a little bit more quickly. So,
Awesome. And how diverse is your clientele or teams?
mhm. Our clients are mostly white men, um, who are the leaders on the C teams. Although I do work with a number of HR professionals who are all people of color, actually, coincidentally. And it's an interesting conversation to have with them, managing the people power of an organization, but also being a person of color and using that lens to really bring in equity and inclusion into their practices. Um, and then on our team we have so a leadership team at Intune has 4 women, so it's a women fueled business. We have a head of strategy, um, creative strategist, and CEO, and myself, and the other 3 women are white women, and then I'm the
Oh,
person of color on the team. And we
okay.
have a collective others that come from a variety of backgrounds.
Okay. Great. David, do you have anything for her before we dive into our topic today? And we just, like I said, we didn't prepare. We just came up with an idea and said, let's discuss it. This sounds like interesting idea. Let's discuss it. You have anything before we move forward?
Yeah, one of the questions that I have that I would like for us to explore is authenticity.
Mm.
Um, in the United States, there is this expectation that everyone needs to conform to a specific ideal. But we
Mhm.
know in a world that has a lot of variety, a lot of uniqueness, other countries, other languages, other cultures, other customs, other religions, how is it possible? And I love your focus on transforming education, K-12, working with young people, because that is our future.
Mhm.
But in dealing with leaders, primarily corporate leaders, um, I'm excited to hear your insight into how you're able to get them to appreciate that when you have workers who can be authentic, who can be themselves, who in essence are liberated from the responsibility of conforming, um, uh, assimilating, or accommodating who they are in the workplace, they
Mhm.
actually create more productive workers. So
Mhm.
that's my interest going forward.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's part, I guess, that's part of the identity and role switching that we're discussing today.
Mhm.
I do know that how we define ourselves and how others define us makes pretty much a huge, or has a huge impact on how we behave, how we show up,
Mhm.
how we perform, how we communicate. So
Mhm.
let's dive into this, Wendy. Role switching and identity.
Absolutely. If you think of a human being as having a certain amount of energy to put out into the world, you wake up and you have a certain amount of energy. If you're holding a lot of energy and space to code switch, right? To identity switch based on I'm in this meeting and I need to perform a certain way, or I'm in this cultural session and I need to show up and represent Asian women. I mean, if I were to do that, I'm wasting energy not being myself. Unfortunately, people on the other side have expectations of how maybe a CEO shows up, or how um, an Asian woman has voice or no voice or agency. And so it's that I have an educator friend who says human beings are essentially in conflict with each other. It's how we deal with the conflict. It's like I am me and you are you, and whatever expectations you have of me, I can choose to either take on or not take on, right? And I can choose to be skilled in how I set a healthy boundary for myself so that I have the space to step in and be myself. And so that's the work, whether we're talking about corporate or with our families, that's the work. Like, what are the human skills that are needed for us to work with each other and be successful and just making space for ourselves to be who we are? And it also starts with self acceptance, too, right? Like knowing yourself, accepting yourself, loving yourself, like all those things that they say are so fundamental.
So let me ask you this, because I heard you say if we are role switching, we are
Hmm.
wasting our energy. So is, let me just understand this and grasp it, because just the other day in my work, in my daily work, I work with diverse uh, backgrounds.
Hmm.
And the other day, I was by 11 o'clock a.m. I had spoken with a Cuban, with an Egyptian, with Saudi,
Hmm.
with African American, with Vietnamese, and with Italian from New York. I mean, that early in the morning. And every time I spoke with each one of them, I was changing styles.
Right.
And that happens. We're talking about the pace, we're talking about everything that had to do with communication and how I communicate with them in a way that they can understand me and I understand them, and we come to an agreement to do business together. So these styles that I am switching throughout the day, it can be really uh, tiring
Hmm.
because I am constantly switching. Is that wasting my energy? Because I've been doing it. I haven't thought of it that way, but I've been doing it all my life.
I mean, it's like when we're this far apart and the expectations are there, how does change actually happen in society? How does change happen over time, right? So if you start showing up less adjusting yourself to the other, but listening to like the human connection and what needs to happen, then the gap can slowly close over time.
Uh-huh.
It takes courage and intentionality around it. But I
Uh-huh.
know what you're talking about. It's like the energy is used to think, how do I be successful? How do I make the connection? How do I be authentic? And if you have a purpose for that connection, there's a motivation to get it right, right?
Okay.
You want it to land. And so I honor that. Like that's important, you know? And is there a place in between where it's like, I might make a mistake in communicating with you today because I might not fully understand your culture. If I do, just tell me. I'm here to learn. And is that enough of a segment intending, enough of a buffer to allow you to just roll with it a little bit more and hold a little less energy and let the in between space take care of itself?
Okay, so when I meet someone, obviously in my line of work, usually I ask where they're from if I cannot pick it up right away, because
Mm-hmm.
I want to make sure that I am doing the right thing based on their
Right.
national cultural understanding. Is that something that we should do all the time, or something that we may refrain from doing? I just want to make
Yeah.
sure that the person that I'm dealing with is comfortable. And sometimes they don't tell you because they feel that's too personal. And sometimes
Mhm.
they do tell you.
Right. Right. I think respecting cultural differences is really important. Like I do use that as a foundational support.
Uh-huh.
And there's something about the transparency and authenticity of like, could we ask them to help, not to guide us, but just if I am misstepping in a way, or if I say something that makes you feel uncomfortable
Mhm.
because we come from different cultures, or because I might not understand your culture or even understand your story, right? We could be of the same culture and still run into the similar type of circumstances. So how can we just create a frame of safety, as human beings, to say, I'm here with an open mind. I'm here to learn from you. I have good intent, and I'm
Uh-huh.
going to assume good intent from you. Do we understand what that means?
Uh-huh.
And then to go into that space a little bit, and then because you're so well equipped and because you have a body of experience, maybe reading the body language, the eye contact, the vocal tones, the closing of the body, physicality, and using that as a way for you to name it. I think it's just like naming it rather than performing to it.
Mhm.
It's the nuanced difference that I feel like I'm personally after,
Mhm.
without being a bull in a china shop about it. But like, can we just make it a little bit more visible? Could I ask you to repeat that again so that I understand it? This is what I heard, right?
Hmm.
Um,
Interesting. David, do you have something to add on this?
I like the idea of mindfulness being more than just knowing how I'm feeling, but knowing whether what I'm feeling or what I'm doing or what I'm saying, does that allow the person that I'm with to feel good about themselves? And that requires that I have some accountability for being able to look at my behavior, my speech, how I express myself, whether or not the person who I'm engaging with feels comfortable, feels relaxed, non threatened, uh, a cooperative state of mind, if you would, a collaborative state of mind. And I think that one of the elements of cultural competence, cultural intelligence, means that we are not so bold as to assert our own mannerisms as being the absolute best mannerisms or the way that we approach a problem, but that we're receptive and open to a fresh perspective. The
mhm.
reason that I'd want to talk with you, Wendy, has less to do with the fact that you are Taiwan American, and more the fact that you live in California. And here we are out east. I'm in Alabama, really, really worlds apart. And
Mhm.
so when you approach that relationship with, you have a unique perspective that I really, really need to capitalize on. It's your perspective. It's the perspective that was formed through the history of your parents, your grandparents, you living. And if we can kind of start with that as the launch pad for the relationship, I've
Mhm.
always found it makes that cross-cultural interaction so much more pleasant.
Mhm. And what I'm hearing you say is really coming to the table and seeing the other person as a whole human being, right? And starting with a platform of respect first. They don't have to earn it, they don't have to work for it. Like you are coming fully respecting who they are and whatever might show up in the conversation to begin with.
Mhm, mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's exactly right. And this leads us to your work, Wendy. When you are working with leaders and with all um, these ethnicities and diverse people, especially with leaders, sometimes we all come with baggage. I mean, we
Mm-hmm.
all come with some form of unconscious bias,
Mm-hmm.
okay? That, if not checked, it can become a prejudice. And when we are working across to bridge uh, the gap uh, across identities, where do you start? I mean, you're working with certain leaders that have been raised uh, with certain, uh, let's say, certain customs, certain
Mm-hmm.
ideas, certain beliefs. How does it work when you're trying to show them that there's another way outside of your way, that there's another world outside of yours that you need to be mindful of? How accepting and how adjusting
Mm-hmm.
are they to this idea of unconscious bias has to be checked all the time before it becomes a prejudice?
Mm-hmm.
How does it work?
I'm thinking of a team that's led by an East Indian man. And I'm thinking of a team that's led by a Chinese CEO. And I think of what we do first is we do a personal intake, you know, so we spend an hour hearing the personal stories of each person that we work with on a team first. And then we spend a separate hour hearing about their professional story. So we separate the personal and the professional, and we really do a deep dive and get to know their story.
Mhm.
And then I would say, culture aside, not that it's not really important, but then we look at the behaviors. So knowing their personal story, when these leaders are in, you know, meetings with their team and behavior shows up,
Mhm.
I'm, as the coach, going back into the personal story and evaluating, could this have come from the cultural lens? Could this have come from the personal lens? And where I'm kind of aggregating the information so that I know how to support them is looking at the behavior as a conditioned tendency. So someone's trigger or someone's go-to behavior in, you know, needing to, you know, be more authoritative or to um, hide information because it's shaming or because it's, you know, whatever comes from the culture. um, we look at the behavior first and we identify it and name it. And then in a private coaching session, we might go and unpack it a little further, whether it goes back to the roots of culture or back to the roots of their upbringing, their little child left behind, not having had a voice, whatever those stories are. Because people's cultural upbringings affect them in a way and shapes them in a way um, that affects them as a human being. And I think if you go back to, people ultimately need dignity, belonging, and safety to thrive. And so, regardless of what culture you're coming from, there's a part of you that's always wanting to feel the dignity, the respect of others, a feeling like I belong here. This is a group where I have safety enough so that I can belong here. And so I think regardless of what culture you want that, some cultures make it harder to have one of the three or other. And some of the cultures make it hard because it's hard to communicate about those things. You know, the permission to actually be open is hard. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. One thing, I mean, David, feel free to jump in on here. One thing that I'm hearing, in within a culture, we all have to to feel safe, right?
Hmm.
I mean, we're all three of us live in the United States, And as a culture, as a country, or as an environment, we all, regardless of where we're coming from, we need to feel safe. But there's a lot of, and I have a lot of example that includes a personal example where we have to switch styles. We
Mhm.
have to switch identities to feel safe, or at least feel some form of belonging. Whether that works or doesn't work, at least that's what we try. And I was sharing with David that I had an African American, a lady that she had two names, first and second name, and she uses her one name when she's with her group, and then the other name in corporate America. And when
Mhm.
I ask, wait a minute, well, you have these two names, why are you using one in this environment and you using another in another environment? The answer was, well, because if I didn't do that, I wouldn't be where I'm at today in corporate America, which is basically still, although there is diversity, we're working hard at it and we're working to change minds and hearts. We still have a long way to go because corporate America is still largely influenced by white majority, although that majority is actually shrinking, and we're
Mhm.
seeing it in several parts of America. Um, why? And I can share another story with you, Wendy. I mean, sometimes we have to be vulnerable to discuss certain issues. Um, I was born and raised in Morocco, so I came here quite a long time ago. And about 20 years ago, I believe, around that time, I was working at a financial institution. And that happened right after 9/11, where obviously there was a lot of tension, there was a lot of
Mhm.
anger, there was a lot of resentment, there was a lot of hate, there was a lot of discussions, so on and so forth. And during that process of application, where we intake the information of the customers, there's a gender, there's ethnicity, there's so many questions. So when I remember vividly, I mean, it just like it happened yesterday. I had asked a lady, and I said, what is your ethnicity? Is it this, based on what we have to answer? And she answered in a mocking way, I'm a
Mhm.
Muslim. And I said to myself, well, this lady doesn't know that she's speaking to one. And
Mhm.
that triggered so many emotions. And after 9/11, with everything that happened, you are, or I am, automatically associated with certain
Mhm.
group of people, although I have nothing to do with them.
Mhm.
So that automatically tells me, all right, you have to do something to feel safe in this environment. Okay. And
Mhm.
to feel safe, automatically I used a nickname that my family used to call me, and no longer my legal name, because it was becoming a danger to me. So,
Yeah.
um, do you encounter this identity switching and style switching to feel safe? Either that or David, you're more than welcome, both of you. I mean, we're here discussing a
Mhm.
subject that hopefully can benefit others and trigger some level of interest. Do you feel that even with, I mean, I know you're thinking, but even with the Asian Americans just recently, of what's been happening
Right.
to the community, which is heartbreaking, a lot of people are under pressure.
If I were out walking with my grandparent, with my, grandmother who's elderly, and in certain neighborhoods right now, like I would not feel safe. I would worry for her. Um, I was bullied in elementary school with people coming up and making fun of me. I grew up in the Midwest. It was a great town to grow up in. It was very there weren't very many Asians in my school. Of my high school, 1,700 kids, my brother and I were the only two Asians, you know. And so I've had pain of knowing what that feels like to be mocked without provocation. Like I did nothing. I was like a 6-year-old kid with a sixth
Yeah.
grader coming up to me in the hallway. And and yet I think that I was lucky that it didn't happen repeatedly over and over. It didn't like settle in my self-identity, although certainly, you know, in high school, like if I had a crush on someone and they didn't like me back, I wondered, is it my identity? Like I went and self questioned myself, right? And so that's the damage of safety, is like we turn it inward on ourselves and we take ourselves away from being fully self-actualized. And that's the damage that we allow the power of the other person to take away from us, is our own strength. So my personal work has been, what do I need to shore myself up, to keep showing up, to stay in the game as a leader, you know, and what do I do so that I'm my authentic self in terms of visibility, in terms of storytelling, so that it's a lived experience of really being present, right? And it's taken work and a self-development journey. And because of that, I feel like I've dealt with a lot of the safety. I think that right now in COVID, it's harder because I'm not interacting with a lot of people in places that make me feel physically unsafe.
Uh-huh.
And the emotional safety piece, I feel like I've learned to activate a voice to speak up to it, in it, without being aggressive, without becoming aggressor myself out of anger or, you know, any, like the awareness is there to toggle with it and play with it. You know, it's dealing with, that's why I do the work I do with DEIB trainings, diversity, equity, and inclusion trainings, is to become an ally and bring more people into allyship and awareness, so that they don't become the one that others other people, so that they don't create spaces that don't feel safe to people.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? Whether
I agree with you, and what you're saying, I'm just continuing adding on to it, is the same way. I felt there was a total unawareness, total ignorance of other cultures, and that's exactly why I started this consultancy and speaking business, just because I wanted to make sure that people have some level of understanding of what the world has to offer.
mm-hmm.
I mean, and we can see it here in the United States. People are so locked up in this little box that they're not so much aware of what outside, except what they're fed through third party. And third
Yeah.
party is usually having an agenda,
Right.
and that agenda has too many agendas. So if you're not well informed, you basically fall victim, and you have emotions towards others that shouldn't be there. And sometimes you kind of say, you know, I understand, but what is it that I have to do? I have to educate. I have to go out there and show myself and be committed to the work I do. So that takes us to identity and social power.
Mm-hmm.
Is
Mm-hmm.
there?
You know, another area that we
Yeah.
really haven't gone into, but significantly impacts the interaction among people, is the role that the amygdala plays in recording all of our social experiences and kind of serving as an early warning system. So how is it that as we find ourselves in circumstances where we are having to, in a sense, retrain our amygdala to be more universal, to recognize that what maybe we once thought of as being a threat is not really a threat? And I'll give you the perfect example. Japanese Americans who were put in internment camps during World War II. And I lived in North Dakota for a while, where there was actually a surviving one of the internment camps. And realizing that the amygdala has recorded those experiences, like Mona says, those unconscious, those implicit biases that can become real issues, real barriers to being effective with people, especially if somebody does not have many experiences, let's say with Asian people from different Asian countries, to know the difference, for example, that somebody from the Philippines looks different from somebody who's from Japan, who looks different from somebody who's from Thailand. And so when we live in a world that we accept is naturally safe, but that we have to be welcoming of unique experiences, sometimes, the neurophysiology can interfere with us evolving in our species. And I just was curious if that had ever come in any of the training or discussions that you've had.
Yeah, I mean, when someone doesn't feel safe, their brain is going to tell them a story or put a thought in their head that's going to give them the perception of safety, right? And so that whatever that thought is in there is going to trigger the feeling that comes behind it, and that's what's they're going to take action on, and that's the impact that occurs. And so, how do we bring more mindful awareness to the thoughts that are in our head, that the critical narratives that show up and the biases that show up are not necessarily the full version of the truth, right? There might be some sensing and there might be a thread of the truth, or there may be no truth at all in there, but they're the stories that have been imprinted on us from our culture, our families, social media, wherever we're intaking information, and we hang on to it because our brain tells us that this is a path to safety. Right. And so rewiring it is a conscious process of understanding, what is having this particular thought serve me, right? I don't belong here. What does that do to me? It keeps me small. It keeps me holding back, right? It feels like safety, but in the end, it prevents me from doing what I'm supposed to be doing as a human being in whatever space I'm showing up in. Mona, is this relevant to your experience? Is this how you?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, listen, I've gone through so much that if I was not a strong woman, it would have affected me
Totally.
negatively. And luckily, I am.
A strong woman.
Yes, it hurts. Okay, it does hurt. Yes, it does prevent you from opportunities, and I've seen it so many times. But you know what? I got to a point where if you don't give me that opportunity, I will create it myself.
Right.
All right. So that's what's been happening with me all along. You kind of get to the point where you're saying, this can't be real. I mean, this can't be my reality. I have to change it. And since we're talking about that, the identity, I can be wrong, and you both of you can chip in on this. Identity and social power, how much are they related? Is there a social power given to certain identities more than others? How do we reconcile that? I mean, perhaps it's a difficult question, but it is real. It is real, and we see it all the time. You identify with this group, you have more social power than another group.
Right.
How do we deal with that? I mean, do we change our identity? Of course we can't. Of course we cannot be faking it. We are calling for authenticity at all times. Yes, you want to amend your style. Yes, you want to amend your communication style and your way of doing things, just to be respectful more than anything, and connect with people in a better way than really identify yourself as that group. Do you see that in your work, that some social powers do exist with certain identities?
Um, the organizations that I work with, there are power dynamics. There's an awareness that if you're a marginalized group and you're in a position of leadership, that it's not all on you to do the allyship work and to be teaching everyone else. Like, it's like it's a fine line. It's like what's in your role that's job function, and what's in your responsibility as a person of color, right, or an underrepresented person. So um, it's spreading the responsibility of that cultural piece out so that more people see it, buy into it, take responsibility for it, are accountable for it. And so I think the organization has some responsibility to create the structures that support that collective coming online of sharing allyship work.
Uh-huh.
There definitely is. I mean, okay, I can talk about America right now. We talk a
Since we're
lot about
here.
white privilege is a topic that is scary for people because it means someone's holding the mirror up and saying you have privilege that impacts other people's lives. You have privilege that uh, you don't necessarily see, that you might not be using in a positive way. And so that requires, someone to step into internal work that they may or may not want to do. Right. And so how do you get around it? You name it, you train people to it, you um, do it in a way that also has compassion. That's
Mhm.
not that militant, aggressive, like everybody change right now. It's like person by person. They've got to come online and do it in a way that they can buy into it. And so I think the bottom line for all of this is like identity is about self determination and some level of agency. Like, how can I define myself? Because if you look at all the people wanting, what's my purpose? You
Mhm.
know, what's my mission in life? Where do I belong? All of that searching externally is really so that you have a sense of resonance inside, a sense of peace within yourself, right? And that has to do with how do you see yourself? How do you love yourself? How compassionate are you with yourself? How do you fill yourself up first so that you're grounded in the world? That no matter what is coming at you and who's, you know, othering you, using social power over you, that it doesn't it doesn't matter from a personal standpoint. There's still systemic issues around who's getting the promotions, who's getting the job offers, who's in the inner circle around networking, right? Who holds the purse strings on financial power. Like all of that is systemic and needs to happen too. And that's a little bit less in control of the individual, And so that's who in positions of responsibility is doing that work to scale. Company leaders, foundations and what they support and work that happens, government organizations, like where are we thinking of scale of how are we reaching people to turn the systemic um, levers of change, and
Huh.
then giving space for the individual to own their own identity as much as possible.
David, any question on this?
Well, Wendy, I was going to ask you the question, and to what extent can we require accountability? Accountability for um, white white privilege, for example, might be more uh, financial privilege. Wealthy people have more power, they have more influence. A wealthy German is going to have as much power, let's say, as a wealthy Japanese person. So there are a lot of things that go into power and privilege and influence. But one of the problems I think that has not been addressed in this country is at all levels accountability to self and accountability to society, to say to what extent am I responsible for contributing to the
Mm.
problem, and to what extent am I actually contributing and making the problem better,
Mm.
resolving the conflict. So accountability, how do we get there?
It's such a great question. I think one of the impediments in the United States is that there's so much, the whole pioneer spirit, right? You're independent American, that ethos carries through, and it makes us a very me-centered culture, and we don't have enough we ethos, And so the question is, what do we do to shift from the me to the we thinking? And that's like parenting. That can be taught in schools, right? That can be the culture within an organization, that you lead with those values, and it pulls through everything you do. And then we can have a little bit more accountability when more of us are believing that the we matters, right? But there's also a mindset around multiculturalism being a finite set of resources. It's a pie, right? And if you get your slice and you get your slice, there's only so much to go around, which is a fallacy. So how do we break that myth in thinking? I don't know that I'm getting at the accountability piece, but I'm getting at like what are things that can support better accountability. And I think accountability on a personal level is a personal decision. It's just like, am I going to be vegan? Am I going to recycle and compost? What kind of imprint am I going to have on this earth while I'm alive in this body today? Personal choice, personal conviction, lifelong commitment, right? Who's up for that? And then systemically, take that person and put them in positions of leadership and let them lead from there. It's a sea change that we're looking for. So it's sort of like I keep coming at it from like a systems lens. Like, what will it take to have systems change?
Yeah, absolutely. I do agree with you. And this part that you mentioned, it starts at home,
Mm-hmm.
starts in schooling, early age. And sometimes I even wonder if the information or the courses are given in schools, especially at early age, are they the cause of what we're seeing today, or should they be amended? Should they be modified to build this new generation that there is not just an I. There is we.
Mm-hmm.
We have to start caring for others and also provide these youngsters the right historical facts,
Yeah.
the right far away from. But again, how can they do that if they don't know, or if even if they want to do it, are they allowed to do it? So these things we have to take into consideration. How do we go in and change this? How do we contribute and add in value since early age? And the only way it can happen, that is obviously if the parents are educated enough on these subjects,
Mm-hmm.
and not only educated enough, but are they aware of these subjects, these matters? And the other thing, obviously, the courses that we are teaching to our children, what information, what are we feeding them? Okay. So that is so much important. And I think one of the things that I you reminded me now, one of the things that I want to do is approach schools
Mm-hmm.
to provide my training for students.
I can put you in touch with people.
Oh, please do. Here we go. Please do. Here we go. And it just, I find it so important because when you are coming to the world or showing up to the world with so much right here and so much right here, it takes a long time to change it. It takes a long time to cleanse it. So if we start at early age, it's much easier, and we are going to have the results that we are seeking. And that is, like you said, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and the we mentality instead of the I mentality. Again, I do understand that there is cultural differences, and there must be some cultural differences between nations, and that's what makes the world beautiful the way it is. But at the same time, there are few things that we can really modify the tiny bit to give the results that we want to give. And if we are living here in America and it is considered the leader of the world or the leader of the free world, we really have to live up to our name, to our reputation, and what we project to the world out there. We cannot be saying we are this body of values, we are this body of democracy, of this and that, and we're through our actions we are doing the total opposite. So hopefully our efforts do not go in vain, and we're making a difference. Anything there, David? We're getting closer to our time here, and in these conversations we can have them all day long. It just it never ends, but we have to end them at some point. Anything that you'd like to add on there, David?
Yeah, I think it's encouraging that we can be optimistic, that if we raise our children up in the way that they should treat other people, people who are not a part of their family, who don't live in their neighborhood, who maybe have come from a different place. If we could teach our children to have respect for humanity as a whole, for our species, that if we don't help others, regardless of where they're from, be the best that we can be, we're never going to be able to be the best that we can be. And so it's encouraging to participate in this conversation, Wendy and Mona, and see that we are getting so much more closer in our ideas, and the combining of our ideas to lead to real tangible solutions.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. One last thing, because I had it in my mind, and because we all are, our work is revolves around diversity, inclusion, and multiculturalism, culturalism, cultural intelligence, and everything. And your work, Wendy, how do you advise the leaders that you work with, or the companies you work with? What do you advise them to when they have to have a difficult conversation with people that are different than they are?
Lead with empathy, to tap in and check in. And I might lead them through a visualization of, like, when was a time that you felt really heard by someone else, and what did that feel like for you? And then help them visualize. And if they have to prepare themselves for difficult conversation, I help them envision themselves outside somewhere in nature, and it's a gathering of all the people that they need to communicate with, and that they're all gathered together, and for them to find their voice and what's the truth that needs to be spoken into that space. And they can use that as a backdrop for whatever communications, writing, a conversation that can come back out. It helps them do that self-reflective process first before they take action. Too often, we're just in do mode, and that creates some of the problems because we haven't checked in at the human level first.
That's excellent. Lead with empathy is always important. And with empathy comes everything else. And obviously, one thing that I do tell my customers is very simple things, and we have discussed that on our last episode, is get to know the culture of the person that you're dealing with, whether it's a national or regional. Take some time to understand who they are, where they're coming from, what kind of elements that you can be looking for, or that can help you have a better communication and better results, basically. So I guess we have to conclude this session. It's very informative. I will be quiet right now and let you have the last words, Either Wendy or David, have the last words and tell our viewers what you want them to know, and what would you like them to do?
I definitely want to hear from David too. But I have two thoughts that I think could simplify it. So, what would happen if we walked around with the belief that every single human being has the human right to truly love and appreciate themselves? Whatever that means to them. Like every person has the right to that. And the second is that every single person has the human right to love and appreciate their heritage, whatever it is and wherever it came, whatever shaped them, that they have the right to own their stories and to let that story inform their life however they choose is right. I'm wondering if we just only held those two things in every conversation, every place. I'm looking at a person across from me. David, you have the right to love and appreciate yourself. I'm going to be here in your, not a mesh partner, but I'm here to hold space for that for you. What would that conversation be, right? So that's my 2 cents. That's my ending thought that kind of hopefully distills it down into a simple practice.
I love that, Wendy. I love it. Very straightforward, very simple, but so profound.
Mm.
Yes, so profound. David,
People don't do it.
how do we get people to think that way, and how can we get people to act that way as well? David, the last word will be yours as usual.
Wendy, what you just said about every human being has the right really touched me spiritually. But there's also an equal obligation for me to say, and what can I do, and how could I do it so that it creates that environment which allows that person's love and respect for themselves to actually blossom, to grow, to increase. Because you know what? If we had that attitude in all of our human dealings, where we gave everybody the right to self-love, self-appreciation, exploring who they are in a historical context, we would be much more proactive in all of our dealings in every situation. So this is a wonderful conversation to participate in, Mona. Thank you for inviting. Wendy, thank you so much for the spirit and joy that you brought to this conversation.
Yes, thank you so much, Wendy. Also, thank you, David. I think after hearing both of you, the last statements, I feel if I continue talking about this topic, I will have tears coming down, because it's getting emotional, and sometimes this brings back a lot of memories of so many things that happened to, I'm sure, every one of us here, and that you have witnessed happening to others, that you, at that point, you were not strong enough, or you were not aware enough to make a difference. But today I am saying, and I am pledging, that we are here to make a difference. We are here to bring that change that the world needs to have inclusion, equity, diversity, where everyone is loved, where everyone is accepted, regardless of their background, their philosophies, their ethnicities, their lifestyle. Pretty much everyone has the right. Everyone deserves that right to be included, respected, and given that opportunity. So I tell you, with all my holding that, thank you so much. Hopefully we can have this again. And until next episode, stay connected, stay aware, and stay safe. Thank you so much, Wendy. Thank you, David.
Thank you both so much.